and having a master's in that, and also working for America's oldest and rarest apparel factory that did everything in-house synthetic fabrics because it was so toxic. I have a very good idea of the manufacturing industry of cheap labor and sweatshops and everything, all of that ugly side of it. And the reason I'm doing this podcast late is because I want to be able to talk to people on the other side of the world who also have that experience, who understand what that cheap, toxic side of manufacturing is like. Because I feel like a lot of people here in the US do not understand that side of it, that in order to have the cheap prices that we enjoy as consumers, there is a cost on that worker, whether it's cut benefits or whether it's um, cut wage rates or whether it's also just bad workmanship environments, bad worker environments. So you have like dangerous environments where you have toxic materials being used or equipment that's not regulated, or yes, exactly, the health risks. I mean, I know for the apparel, especially textile manufacturing is really awful. The synthetics that they use, it's a petroleum-based fabric. The dye process, a lot of times people were not given gloves, and so the dyes that were, that have gone into the skin can cause a lot of issues. When I worked as a theater engineer, as a costume designer for a summer stock theater, and just being stupid as being younger high, I used red dye and I didn't use gloves, and I ended up getting some kind of weird condition that came every year. This allergic reaction because it had entered my bloodstream. So the dyes are very dangerous whenever you don't have any kind of protection. And I know a lot of those factories, they did not offer that protection. A lot of times they used lead materials. And I know that US corporations have a terrible reputation when it comes to factories, especially in China. Being that the apparel and textile industry went to China, that's something that I follow exactly. Um, so it was interesting. Yeah. Well, more people need to, and I think a lot of people don't have that experience because, like I said, the US apparel factories are very rare. To have a factory that does everything in-house except make its own fabric is something that is extremely rare. And so it's that experience of having the warehouse experience, the production experience, everything else, that you get that insight and you know what the industry was doing. You know what the industry was doing in China, you know what was happening in Vietnam, you know what all the other places, and you know that corporations were justifying the cheap labor and the exploitation of workers by saying, well, if I didn't do it, they wouldn't be able to feed their family. If I didn't do it, their village wouldn't be able to have this. If I didn't do it, their home wouldn't be able to have this. And it's just that moral justification that ends up exploiting people for that toxic, cheap factory labor. Exactly. And so this is the industry. This is what manufacturing, the dark side of manufacturing is that people don't want to admit. And you see it with apparel factories. You see it with textile factories. You also see it with the digital factories, the ones that make iPhones and mobile phones and digital technology. And if you go on China labor reports, it's something that I've been following, where it lists the violations, and most of it is U.S. corporations. There's also the toy factories. They have pretty horrendous violations that's listed here. I know that China has since increased their regulations and also increased their labor rates, that they are investing in green technology. They're actually working on investing in consumer worker conscious factory production. Everything that the USA used to do, China is now doing. And because they're doing that, they're shutting down their toxic factories. I know in 2018, Chairman Tsai shut down 80,000 toxic factories. It was unprecedented, but that's part of his war on pollution that's been going on. I know that they're trying to clean up their soil. I know that they're trying to clean up their water and all the things that, that 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 factory production, the cheap factory production, all those cheap prices that we enjoyed came at a cost, and it was a cost of that nation. It was a cost of their lands and their water and their health. If you look at, I think it's World, oh, what is it? World Organization, or who? I'm sorry, World Health Organization and their reports. And you have reports in China on respiratory fallout from, air pollution. I know I think it was 2010 when they were at their peak of just the air pollution, they had what's called nuclear winters, where it was just the air was so thick with this smog and this just grossness of the factories that it was causing a lot of health problems, especially with respiratory illnesses. It was causing a lot of fatalities, low infant mortality rates as well. And so China becomes this opportunity to look at what they've done and learn from them, not allow the factories to continue to do their same exploitation of labor, to continue to repeat the same processes that they did in China that destroyed them, and move it to some other nation just because it's cheap, whether it's USA or Vietnam. India, I know, is actually increasing their solar tech. They're getting solar parks. They're starting to also invest in that green technology. But you don't take a factory and because they can't get away with hurting workers in one nation, you don't bring it to another. Eventually, we need to stop this pattern. Exactly. We can't just export the problem because the globe, the earth, is all connected. And so whatever toxic chemicals you put into the air, it's going to be everywhere. This idea that we live in bubbles doesn't exist. you know, so we have to be more conscious about what's going on in the earth and realize that it's an ecosystem. You know, we have economics has this thing called butterfly effect and ripple effect. And science has that same thing, the idea that if you put something into the air here, it's going to have either a ripple effect where it directly affects the people in that area, or it's going to have some other effect somewhere across the other side of the earth. Um, so we look at science as this ecosystem, working on this logical plane and understanding that what we do here affects something else. But we can't just let corporations keep getting away with exploiting workers. We can't allow them to just move their bad practices from one country to another. We need to look at China and learn from what they did to their people, what they did to their lands, what they did to their water, what they did to their air, and not allow that to happen again. We have the medical reports from China that says because we had this is the fallout. Because we had this is the fallout. We have all that data and we can't just ignore that data because it doesn't make, US corporations look good, which it doesn't. They need to change their practices. Um, Foxconn is a great example. Foxconn is one of that I know of is one of the worst, where they had riots that were breaking out, where they had workers who were protesting with suicides, where they had to install nets in order to catch the people that were jumping, off of the roof. Foxconn is known for exploiting the trade students, the railway students who would be, you know, they thought they were going to be getting an education, and instead they ended up putting together iPhones. Um, Foxconn was also, yeah, Foxconn was also, they got in trouble in China for their guarded worker dormitories. In fact, they had to, originally they were taking care of it, and then they had to offshore it to somebody else or outsource it to somebody else. But they're known for that, especially with undocumented migrant workers who they would keep in those guarded dorms. They just have a very bad reputation, and the China labor reports reports all of that. Um, I'll give you a couple of examples. Let me see if I can read this. It's really small. Um, So we have one that's like a nightmare for workers, appalling conditions with toy factories. Okay, before we remember when the lead paint was happening and the scares of that, and we were worried about the kids getting exposed to this dangerous material. And I know when factories are not given these regulations, that they will cut costs, and sometimes those cutting costs means they're using material that they should not be using because it's cheap. And it's that cheap production that we need to watch out for because that ends up hurting people. Um, let's see. Well, here's one: lack of independent unions, which represent workers' interests. So in China, they didn't have those. In the US, we have them, but people keep attacking them, saying that they're corrupt, but they don't understand that the unions are what's there in order to give the workers a say when it comes to, a collective voice. The adjunct instructors do not have a union, and so they end up becoming the substitute for salaried professors. And I know in Virginia, we had to sign a contract that said we would not work within the system if it gave us benefits. So if we worked in several different colleges, we wouldn't be able to accumulate enough hours that would allow us to have benefits, even though we would be doing the work in the various colleges. Um, I think from what I've heard that that has been changed, but I know when I was an adjunct, that's something I had to sign as a condition of employment. If I wanted to be employed, I had to sign that contract. And so we have a lot of these instances where people are, it seems like they're voluntarily allowing themselves to be explored as a condition of, of, um, of employment. In the case of a factory worker, a factory student, a trade school student who can work at a factory as an apprenticeship. Okay, so they're going to come into this factory, they're going to pay the school money in order to have this apprenticeship at a factory where they're supposed to be working every day or, as a set period of time, but they're basically working at that factory as far as the factory is concerned for free. They're giving that factory free labor. They're paying the school in order to have the credit to work for free. And then once they're done with that apprenticeship, the factory can give them a non-compete clause, which shuts them out of the industry for at least 5 years. And so you have this continual replenishing of cheap labor, free labor for your factory. New students, you're going to be getting all the fresh ideas, especially with marketing, all the insight of the new people, the young people that they want, cycling through their factory system. And then when they graduate, they can shut them out. I know with internships, that was happening, where designers and graphic designers, interior designers, all of them, the corporate world, the white collar jobs, they were starting to be substitutes for internships, even though it's illegal to do that. You can't just substitute an employee job with an intern. But if students don't understand what the laws are, you can get away with it. If they don't know what their rights are, you can get away with it. And so we would have commercial contractors um, hire interior designers in order to save their clients $27,000. And the student would have to pay the school in order to have the privilege of doing the internship for exposure. The idea that they would have this on their portfolio. But what good is having that on your portfolio is that after you graduate and you become the professional, that the professionals are no longer hiring the professionals when they can get the free labor from the internships. And that becomes the problem because the students who are getting hired under exposure end up not being able to get the job as a professional because nobody wants to hire the professional anymore when they can get the cheap student. And so we end up having this exploitation that happens. You see it, I've seen it as an artist. Artists are told to work for exposure all the time, and we're told to work for love, not money. And so that sets you up as being almost this martyr of your passion that you have to, only way you can really do it is you have to give it all away. But looking at the logistics of everything, logistics being things that are measured, such as mass and distance and time and money, and looking at that, if you give all your raw material costs, all your raw material products away to create your production, your art, you eventually don't have any money to replenish your supplies, and then eventually you have to give up. Exactly. And so that whole starving artist becomes a thing. But now we're starting to see that same starving artist mentality in all the various job industries. Marketing people are now expected to not just be the specialist of marketing, not just their little niche. Now they have to be the graphic designers and the web designers and the social media managers and all these other jobs. There is no specialist job anymore. It's a jack of all trades specialist. The reason I know as much as I have is because I've worked as that jack of all trades specialist in various positions in various industries. um, Working at that manufacturing company, worked my way up from customer service where I was doing a bunch of things that was way above my pay grade, way above my job title, doing special projects for the president and vice president, including trying to resource a tuxedo manufacturer from China, and that's how I learned about Alibaba. But then, not being able to get the bigger positions until I put an ultimatum and say, promote me or I'm out of here. And then getting that marketing specialist, which was me running the entire marketing department for Wolf Fording and then their five sister affiliates or four sister affiliate companies on $10 a month. Now, in order to do that, in order to carry five businesses, basically, um, yeah, on $10 a month, I had to know the entire market industry. I had to know who was doing what the competitors were doing. Most of the competitors had offshored everything, so I had to know what was happening in China, what was happening in Vietnam, what was happening in all the different industries that was part of that, all the different manufacturing companies that were part of that, in order to be able to compete at that level. And that was the expectation of the customers. They didn't care that we didn't have that profit margin. They wanted us to be able to compete with the same pricing as the rest of the people and then still be able to do the same production value and the marketing value and everything else that everyone else had. And it was the only way you could compete in such a tight niche market. So you learn a lot. You learn a lot, especially on how to be able to get your information out there on on pennies a day if need be. But there's a lot of things that you can learn when you work at a manufacturing company, um, especially one that does everything in-house except make own fabric. And I know being an apparel engineer and synthetic fabric is incredibly toxic. Um, a polyester or rayon or any of those is a petroleum base, which is an oil base, or I'm sorry, gas, like a gasoline base, which means the chemicals have a very toxic waste product once you do your production. And so if there is no regulations on what happens to that waste product, if we're changing the Clean Water Act, if we're changing all of this and we allow that stuff to enter the waterways, now we've got a problem where we've got the consequences of these toxic chemicals being introduced into a new ecosystem that it should not be in, such as water, and the bacterial growth that could happen from that, and the inability to filter that out. Now it's going to start entering the human bloodstream and start affecting, kids and adults, and especially older adults, the more vulnerable first. And now you have this problem where these diseases are starting to happen, and you have, what we saw in China would be the swine flu and the bird flu and all the other flus. And so we've got that problem, plus with the air quality being affected, the air pollution. Then we've got, everyone wearing the face masks. We've seen these things already. And if we've seen these things already in a period of time, decades and decades of data, decades and decades of seeing it, why would we keep allowing it? Why would we keep allowing people to get hurt by factories? I was part of Retailer Protected Council, which was an organization that tried to teach the consumer the true cost of cheap. And there is a website. They still have their information up, even though we were too small to really be heard or make a difference. But the website, which was created, and the organization which was created by a factory GM of a domestic factory and then two other international factories. So this guy knew his stuff. Is at Retailer Protected. I think it's retailerprotected.org. If you just Google Retailer Protected Council, you'll find it. But he was teaching people what monopolies really look like, and how they end up leading to ghost towns, and how once you have a monopoly and the access to the resources, once the consumer is limited on how they can access the supplies that they need, once you have that monopoly where the startups are shut out and the small businesses can't compete with the pricing because it's been devalued so low, that to try to compete with that pricing would be a profit loss to them. That's how you end up getting those monopolies, when people shortcut their price so low that if you are a small business and you try to compete, you will end up bankrupting your business. Once you have gained control of that monopoly, then your prices can increase exponentially to make up for that profit loss you incurred. And so the people then, the consumers then have a choice: either go without or pay the high prices. There is no other option. And so we want to try to avoid these monopolies, but here in the US, they have actually done things with the tax reform, which allowed the changing of the IPO rules for the NYSE, the initial, what is it, initial public offering, which is a stock option. Um, that got changed. So we had a lot of foreign companies jump on our NYSE, especially ones that were controlled by their own foreign governments. And then we also had the Jobs Act revision bill, which ended up allowing monopolies. And now we have more of these bills going through, and even EOs going through, executive orders, that is changing the regulations that would not allow these things to happen, not allow fraudulent investments to happen, not allow, all these financial scams to happen. All the regulations that were supposed to control that are going away, which is a big problem. That means that we're looking at, the USA is looking at becoming that next toxic, cheap factory nation, where pockets of consolidation of wealth is in these areas, and then the rest of the people are getting ignored. Things like Africa sees with their corrupt government, where the money is controlled in small little pockets, and the rest of these citizens cannot get access to that money. That is, even people that are giving as charity, it has to go through that corrupt government before it gets to the people. And if the people ever see that money, it's a miracle. We're starting to see those things here in the USA, and that's not good. Um, so, being aware of this, one of the ways that you stop corruption is by being aware of what's happening, and then exposing everything, exposing the investment deals they don't want you to see, exposing the unethical behavior of manufacturing companies they don't want you to know about. Because when we start exposing these things, then we get more people aware. And when more people become aware, they stand up against it. Once corruption has fully invested itself into a nation, it's much harder to get rid of. But if you can stand up and prevent it from escalating to a point where it's no longer able to be controlled, where you're no longer able to have that power to stop it, that's when you want to do it. And for the ones that do have the corruption, if you have other nations, being that we are now connected, like we have globalization through our cyber mediums, and the fact that for once the world is now connected, with the exception of the ones that are still under the strict monitoring system of their government that's not letting them have this. But for the most part, the world is connected. And so when we start supporting each other, when we start buying each other's products, when we start doing those things, people can set up, if as long as the internet is still free and the resources are still allowing it, they can set up these free sites where you can put your products, you can put your design on products, and somebody makes it for you, and it's called print on demand. And you can take your information, your cultural history, your whatever it is, your cause that you believe in, or just trying to break a stereotype. If you have a stereotype about your community or anything going on that you want to be changed, you can put that and use the power of branding on t-shirts, on products, and get that information out there. Have the world fall in love with you. They purchase your products. You take those products, you turn them into taxes. You then invest your taxes into your community, and then you use those taxes to build your schools and your farms and whatever it is that you need. That was the original intent of the USA. It's not what we're seeing now. It's hopefully what we will get back to if we can start getting people to be more accountable and more responsible and stop just using people as free labor. Um, there's an article out there was talking about China, how they used prison laborers that for their, going back to the digital industry, where the prison laborers were being used to, it would force them to watch, these video games and play these video games for hours and hours and hours and hours. And you sound like, that sounds like it might be fun, but it's not whenever you're forced to do it and they won't let you stop doing it. When your eyes are getting so tired or, things like that. So and it's anything in its extreme is bad. But where you start treating people, even prisoners, like they're just working or disposable cogs, that's not good. So whenever we talk about criminal reform, we want to make sure that prisoners aren't going to be used as this cheap labor source for the U.S. corporations' factories that are going to be coming to the USA. We want to make sure that, when they talk about these things, the deportation centers, for example, are they just a subsidy, a different name for the guarded worker dormitories that Foxconn got in trouble with in China, with their undocumented migrants? So are we just calling them something else? Is that what these really are? Is our tax money going towards this and building these things? What's happening to the REITs? Those are the real estate, what is it? Real estate investment. I can't remember what the T means, but basically, if you have a converted big box store and you turn it into something else, you have this healthy REITs and investors can invest in. And so we have a lot of opportunities for shareholders to take advantage in a wrong way of people getting, being turned into slaves and those kind of things for factories and that. But being more aware of what's happening with the dark side of manufacturing is the key to stopping that corruption, is making REITs. Yeah. So if you look it up, it's I think it's real estate and really, I can't remember the acronym for it, but basically it's whenever you take that big box store, like let's say Walmart, and they go out of business. And so you have a vacant building. Now you have something that is zoned commercially. And so when an investor invests in it, it becomes that REIT that they're investing in. And there was supposed to be something that, the REITs were going to be affected, but then they ended up not being. But it's really interesting if you research that and what's happening there. But yeah, if you're more aware of what's going on, yeah, exactly. You'd have to talk to a real estate expert. I mean, I'm just somebody who's aware of money patterns, who can follow investment deals, who knows manufacturing because I've worked in it, who knows the apparel and textile industry because that's what I studied for 20 years and also worked in it as well. But there's no way I can possibly know everything. I just know the things that I've studied and researched and followed. I follow with the investment markets. I have an app, one of those investor portfolio apps. And I found that the investment markets were the easiest way to be able to predict trends on what was happening in any kind of industry. So once the factory that I worked with was defrauded by fraudulent investors and I lost my career in a week, I didn't know where I was going to end up in marketing since I wasn't there under the traditional means of, having that marketing degree and, getting in there that way. It was something that I had worked my way up through a factory. So when you're aware of these things, you don't have to know everything. And what I like to do is tell people to just tweet what you know. On Twitter, the whole world is connected. And so everyone is, there's somebody out there who has more research, who's been following this. So if we tweet what we know, we take our data, the information that we know, we put it out there, and then we see who else will connect to it. Okay, I've got this information. I've got this information. And it's really helpful whenever you have a problem and you're able to get that 360-degree perspective of it. You're able to just see it from so many different angles. And it's much harder, I know, at that point for any kind of corruption to hide when everybody is just talking about, here's what I know about this, and here's what I've seen, and here's what I've seen, and here's what I've seen. Somebody's asked to join. I'm not sure how that works.
Hey, how's it going?
Hi. Okay.
Yeah. Hey, I'm on the phone maybe right now. Oh, sorry about that.
Cool. I've never done this before. So are you talking to me then?
What's that?
You're talking to me then.
Am I
Okay.
packing or leaving?
Yeah, you're talking. I'm sorry, I can't be too loud. My family's sleeping. So we're actually talking to each other. I'm sorry, I've never done this before.
That's
Go
cool.
ahead.
What were you talking about? I saw you. What were you talking about?
Oh, so what I'm talking about is the dark side of manufacturing, where manufacturing companies are able to exploit people for free factory labor or cheap factory labor, $1.60 an hour factory labor, and justifying it with, if I didn't do it, then their family wouldn't get fed. If I didn't do it, those kind of things. And
It's
so that's
crazy.
what we're talking about here.
I'm from Philadelphia. Like, this used to be called the warehouse of the world. They made everybody's clothes here at one point, and they don't make shit here anymore. So it's crazy. It's all like crack houses and all these terrible fucking abandos, like where that neighborhood was. The whole industry just died, and that 1%
Yeah.
making it, I guess.
Well, I know a lot of it went out, it outsourced. In 1960s, the engineers of manufacturing were replaced by the financial engineers. And
Mm-hmm.
the factory decisions were no longer about, workers. And, it was no longer that Henry Ford philosophy of, if you pay your workers enough to be able to buy your product, you end up having a long-lasting company. It was
Mm-hmm.
no longer about that. I think it was GM became financial institutions, and so everything became about shareholder value. And so when you laid off or you restructured your company and it laid off a lot of workers,
We
then you
should all
became
happen with the automation coming up with AI and all
exactly.
that. What do you think about that?
Well, I know that China is trying to be the cyber tech and AI tech global company. They're trying to control the world industry of that. You can look at the three cyber tech giants, Alibaba, Baidu,
Mm-hmm.
and Tencent, and you can follow their investment deals and how they're connected. Baidu made a partnership with Ford. Alibaba is in ZTE stock, which is telecommunications, but then they're also doing small business loans with Cabbage. They're also, so you've got like the financial spectrum, you've got the Baidu's in entertainment. Tencent is face competitors. And so these are your cyber tech giants of China, but they're also controlled by the Chinese government. So if
Yeah,
they end up
that
gaining
5G scary
control,
too from them.
yeah, if they end up gaining control of that technocracy, now you've got the Chinese government monitoring everything that we do, everything from our financial transactions to our military communications to everything, which is very scary because they're then setting the moral code that everyone has to follow. And if you look at their concentration labor camps, it says 48
Yeah, I saw
days
that
that you're
shit with
put
the
in that.
Muslims. That shit's fucked up.
It really is, and we don't want that. So the best way to be able to stop that is to expose those investment deals. And a lot of times they're hiding them in emotional distraction or gaslighting, which is that distorted reality. And I have another podcast host that'll teach you how to see through a perfect distortion of reality. Um, but if you expose those deals, because don't let me Alibaba, Baidu, Tencent, the state-owned
It's like similar to
enterprises,
DH Gate
SOEs.
almost.
Yeah, so the SOEs, which is the state-owned enterprises of China, or guys, SOEs, that are currently on our New York Stock Exchange, that are currently on our NASDAQ, that have started to invest in a lot of our U.S. corporations, including Apple. Foxconn, I don't know if you're familiar with that factory, but Foxconn is the factory of Apple and Hawaii Technology. So everybody is saying Hawaii Technology is bad, but they're missing the fact that Foxconn is the factory for Hawaii Technology. So we have to make sure that we understand what is going on and be able to account for all these cyber tech giants of China who's trying to monopolize that technocracy, because if they gain that technocracy.
It's just the problem that so much stuff coming out needs that 5G, like the automated cars, so much shit in the medical industry, like
Mhm.
this. It's so necessary, but it's like is it a necessary good, or it brings a lot of
Right.
problems too with the cancer and shit. Like I heard like trees start growing away from them wires, like It's crazy.
Yeah, well, you have to look at it. So if we have, okay, let's look at all the kiosks that have the retailers. The retailers have started to go to the kiosks. And we have what's called the broadband highways, where you have to pay for the faster. And if you have everybody on that same broadband, then you're going to have a traffic jam, if you would. And that traffic jam is going to cause a lot of problems for those kiosks, the people that have replaced their workers with that. So now you have everyone competing, and you've got, these delays. If you look at manufacturing production, if you have gone offline for a day, you're screwed. That is a massive amount of money that you've lost. The same for retailers, the same for, so you have to take into account, yeah, they want to have this fast speed, they want all this, but what are they willing to do? What are they willing to risk when it goes wrong, when it has problems, when there are glitches, when there are delays? With 5G, the thing also we need to keep in mind is that we are in a technology transitional time. Things are moving super fast. So
Crazy fast.
The code that's happening today will be obsolete by next year, probably. As these computers are learning to basically do their own thing, they're able to think faster than a human person.
So let me ask you something real quick. Do you think it could be possible, like maybe in like 5-10 years, that America just could go all in on like 3D printing and then like kind of cut somewhat of China out and like take some of it back? Like I think like with the automation, we should be able to do that. Like otherwise, it's bad for us, I think.
Mm-hmm. Well, China got it from us. I mean, everything that China knows, they got from us. We we trained their workers.
Yeah, we gave
A
them all
lot
that
of
shit.
times when there were layoffs, the people that were being laid off were forced to tell the people how to do the job. And they say that the data technology is so difficult, but it's really not.
No,
Um, and so it's more of the fear mongering, like, well, we have all of this. It's like, you got that because we gave it to you.
yeah,
And you have it because you were cheaper labor, but now you're not cheaper labor anymore. Now you're starting to invest in these things, and they're looking for cheaper labor, which is coming to the USA. So we are going to get that manufacturing back. The problem is the manufacturing that we're going to get back, the $1.60 an hour factory job, the
automation.
stupid exploitation jobs, the bad worker environment jobs,
I
the
still think either way though, jobs coming back to this country is what we need. It's all we make in this country is jails, courthouses,
mm-hmm.
and fucking banks and Burger Kings.
Not really, because your actual high skilled laborers are just not getting paid. We do have a lot of high skilled laborers, but people don't want to pay for the products and services that they're getting. We have a cheap problem here in the United States. Everybody
Yeah,
wants things cheap or free. And
yeah,
even if you are cheap, they want a discount. you know, Part of the
yeah,
reason I can't be an apparel engineer anymore, especially custom apparel engineers, because I couldn't compete. My raw material cost would be at $80. People want it for 25. In order to give the customer what they want, I'm taking a loss.
yeah.
That's not good for your business. So you have to understand that if you want cheap prices, that comes at a cost. There
Hell
is
yeah,
a
it comes at a cost.
fee.
Yeah,
Yeah, it comes at the cost of the workers. And so if you want to have a strong, healthy factory environment that takes care of the workers, then you have to be able to pay more for that. So how do you do that whenever your income level isn't
take
allowing
more
you
money away
to?
from the top, the people who run the factory, the guy who gets that 1% who's making that bank. I saw the difference in in money is crazy.
There is, but if you take like I've used this before, if you take Walmart CEO salary and you get rid of it and you redistribute back to the workers, you're only making half a penny because of the
Yeah,
massive amount of workers that's under that.
yeah.
Manufacturing logic is money
And
takes up.
it ruins everything in the town when you build it. Like the mom and pop pharmacy gone. You know what I mean? Like the little
Right.
it kills the town. That's
And
what I'm saying.
people
Like
are
like right near me where I live. Like that's all I see is like these banks beaming, a lot of banks. You know what I mean? And
mm-hmm.
that's what I say. That's what America does now.
Yeah, it is. I mean, we've got big banks and we've got banks that's too big to fail, and they always get these bank bailouts. Now, banks have way more information on you than any kind of social media does, and you're not able to restrict that information from them being able to sell it to third-party vendors, which they do. And so banks have this huge leverage here in the United States that they really shouldn't. So how do you break up the big banks? You know, and
Crypto,
if you
maybe.
think,
Crypto,
hmm,
possibly.
what's
Crypto,
that?
uh, like uh,
Um,
like Bitcoin and stuff. You
well,
know.
that's data. Isn't that data mining? So you're basically taking the zeros and ones and you're mining it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So what is the value that you're attributing to it? For example, if somebody decides you've got just these zeros and ones, you've got no real substance behind it. Like when we had the gold standard, we had a substance behind that
Yeah,
money. It wasn't just a matter of printing out more money. You had to have something to back it up. Crypto, you don't have anything to back up. So if something happens to that system and you've
and America's
invested all
trying to
this
break him
money,
down too. The
they
U.S.
have
dollar don't
to,
like that.
yeah. And then that's this question with, people have wanted me to invest before, and it's like, okay, this is what's happening. Where's my guarantee that if something happens to the system, I'm not out? Because I'm taking real money and turning it into Bitcoin with the zero and one. Where is my credibility that that money is going to remain the same? You know, if
Yeah.
you go back to like Kubla Khan, whenever he changed his currency on his citizens, he just decided randomly that they were no longer going to honor this currency and that everybody was going to use this new one. So wiped out the people who had that currency.
That's
And so
terrible.
that's how that currency manipulation happened. The same
But
thing is happening.
that's why the crypto is like out of nobody really controls it, I think it just goes. You know what I mean?
Right. But where is that? I mean, where is the backing of that? You know, if you're turning it into crypto, and I'm still trying to learn this. I'm still trying to understand it. But I'm always looking for like that guarantee that, okay, here's the money. I know that it has some kind of value. What is
Yeah, I think they
crypto
got this stuff that's called gold. You might have heard of that.
have? I don't know. I mean, all of
That's why
this
we're
I'm
going after
considering.
Iran. Really, I heard they're
Yeah,
trying to make everything backed by gold. America don't like that.
well, see, if it goes back to gold standards, that one blue gold standard. And so it destroys the petrodollar, which makes the US economy crash.
Yeah.
And then our dollar is not worth anything. And then our raw material costs increase, which allows China, which is already investing in those factories, to be able to acquire them. And then all of our factories is owned by China. All of our corporations is owned by China. And since we've given all our power as Americans into those
Yeah,
corporations,
like the whole
buy it.
basketball shit. Like the guy Woody or whatever from the Rockets. He said, he's with China, the protesters, and he had to take that shit down. Like we're in America. I'm in Philadelphia, and they kicked the
Yeah.
guy out the Sixers game for that. He had he had a sign he brought with him in the Wells Fargo, and they kicked him out. So it's happening here already.
The biggest problem is with China is their dictatorship, that communist idea that free will and religion creates corruption. This
Yeah.
very extreme monitoring of corruption. If China got rid of that, then we could all participate in that globalization. We could have, if we go back to what the USA was supposed to be, where it was capitalist and socialist at the same time, our taxes that were collected by the people were then supposed to be used for whatever it was the people needed, help offset our out-of-pocket costs, so that we could afford to have the things that we could not normally afford to pay out of pocket for, whether it's public education or safety or public safety or anything that we needed that, the whole community benefits from. We
Yeah, I
can go
believe.
back to that kind of idea.
I think legalizing weed and I think all drugs should be legal personally. And I think if you have the pot market legal, where people actually put the money in banks, that would definitely help our economy a lot. Because
Mm-hmm.
so far, it's ridiculous what happened in Colorado already. And
Yeah.
it's a shame that people are just ass backwards and they don't want to move forward.
Well, it's
Can't
interesting
help.
because
Can't stop progress.
remember Virginia's first production was tobacco. And so it wouldn't be hard to have that marijuana production that would be able to allow a lot of cities to be able to create the revenue that they needed, for their city. And as soon as it becomes legal, you know that businesses are going to jump on the opportunity. The ones that were the advocates against it will suddenly become the advocates for it, just like they were in Colorado. And it's not hard to change I think you would have to change the cigarette tax. There's a cigarette law on the federal scale and then also in your state scale. So you would just require a couple of the changes of words, and then you would have to figure out what to do with the intoxication. How do you create the safety measures that you would need if something under that influence that? So that's all it would require is just figuring out what the intoxication measures would be, just like alcohol. What would be reasonable in order to operate a machinery? What would be reasonable in order to drive? What would be that kind of thing. And
I think that the problem is law enforcement looks at it also like a way that they could possibly get people like for a DUI kind of way. And people, if I drove today, and I didn't smoke at all, like it's in my system, and I would go to jail, or they would say so.
Exactly, because it's longer standing than just alcohol. So you would have to take those things into account to make sure that you aren't, jailing people just because they have the system. So there's some mechanics to work out, but I think it is possible. And if you could work it out, it would be a revenue. If you look at it as that, for a lot of cities to be able to, in a lot of countries, especially rural areas, be able to produce this product that would benefit them and allow them to bring in more income into the city, and that would allow them to have the things that they need. So I'm always looking at things at a cost perspective, from the cost perspective side, and you weigh what the pros are and what the cons are, and what would be what would be the barriers to overcome.
I think this even for the textile too, like the hemp, like people forget all about that. Like China got that. We gave that shit to them, and that's terrible.
We did. I mean, my entire industry went there. So, what
like you had to grow it. Like Washington made you grow it. Like this shit's like important, and everyone's it's just a drug.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, with I mean, China.
The biggest drug that affects us is alcohol. It's the worst for our society. It causes damage to people and everybody around them.
It does. I mean, like I said, you can look at the benefits, looking at the same regulations that we use with alcohol and intoxication, and then seeing what the measures of intoxication of having a drug, and then how to monitor, how to measure, how to gauge what would be the reasonable safety standard of that. And once you have all those things down, then you can, legalize.
I think it possibly like release all these petty drug offenders. It's costing us so much fucking money. It's stupid, Yeah. I went to jail for 3 months for a dime bag.
Wow.
That was a real good taxpayer spend right there. It's crazy, right?
Well, it is. If you look at criminal justice, it does need a huge reform, and we do have a lot of places where we're criminalizing some activity and some groups of people a lot more harsher than we are other groups of people for the same activity. Because we have a lot of biases in the system that needs to be addressed, and a lot of inequality in the system that needs to be addressed, and also an unfair distribution of judgment. Where the judgment is not matching what the crime is. So we have a lot of that. But we do need a huge reform of the criminal justice system. We just want to make sure that the criminal reforms we're talking about right now is making it so that prison workers are being able to be cheap substitutions for factory workers. We want to make sure that doesn't happen, because that's what is happening in China.
Because but I was saying, like with the whole drug thing too, though, it's like it's hard for these people to get jobs in their own country because everybody's a criminal. Like, like I was thinking about it. Like, if all these cops, all this tech, you're going to make everybody a criminal. Everybody's going to have something,
I mean, people don't understand that everyone is capable of committing a crime under the right kind of circumstances.
Absolutely.
There is a criminal. If you have a situation where there is no other alternative for you to be able to bring home money for your family.
It has something to do with my daughter. I wouldn't even think about it,
Yeah. and people just they take these positions where there is a stereotype criminal and that this is an evil person, and it's really not. It's the circumstances that people find themselves in, the desperation that people find themselves in, and especially in a justice system where there is no out for anyone except for the that criminal route.
I've
Um,
told a lot of people it's like even with like a presidential election, for example, like if you're Democrat or Republican, it's like I feel like it's people on a glass window. Somebody's looking
mhm,
in, somebody's looking out, and it's just
yeah.
one perspective. I'm on the outside looking at both of them, laughing, and that's just how I look at it.
Yeah, I mean, I have about 13 different perspective lenses to view a problem from, just from working in various industries and being that jack of all specialists and having to do so much outside of my pay grade and my pay title. Um, but it helps whenever you have that, whenever you have an engineering perspective and a scientific perspective and an analytical perspective. And I had to teach myself to think like an economist because I got tired of that whole do it for love, not money. I wanted to break that cycle.
Yeah,
A
because
very,
people
very
got to eat,
bad
you know.
habit. But so once we get more perspectives at a problem, once we start having, and I love these things where we get to have these conversations, we get to hear from each other, we get to find out what's going on. Um, so you said in Pennsylvania, I know in 2008, I think it was when they
Philadelphia,
started outsourcing a lot of the industries overseas. A lot of the manufacturing industries started to be outsourced. And when we do that, we're removing the jobs that were here.
it
We're not
actually is a
finding
terrible thing here because
replacements for
now we got an
people.
invasive species that came here too. This lanyard bug or whatever came here, and now we can't even send our wood or our agriculture out because it's
Yeah,
quarantined. Is that crazy? So
it's a lot of work. And it's like, how do you fix it? Like, how do you fix it whenever scientists are not being believed? And how do you fix it when, people that would have these expertise are not being believed? Piece into a problem. I know a lot of times when problems are being dealt with, that it's usually a small collective group and you're not getting the rest of the people. Like whenever you're talking about manufacturing issues, it's usually the people at the top, the executives, the CEOs, the ones that haven't actually worked on the floor. They have their theories and they have their charts and they have their things, but they don't know what the production is of that factory. I say if you want to know the production health of a factory, talk to the workers. They're going to tell you exactly what's going on. They're going to tell you whether things are working, whether they're not. They're going to tell you what the health scope of that company is. But politicians, when they talk to factories, they don't talk to the workers. They always talk to the people at the top. But if you're going to talk to, if you want to know what a factory is, talk to your workers because they know, they're right there on the floor. So anyways, this has been really good. And like I said, we want to try to avoid that technocracy from happening. We want to try to get manufacturing companies actually start getting into a conversation that happens. I was crazy like what do you mean? What happens? Oh, okay. It was very nice talking to you. So I'm gonna finish it because it's getting kind of late. But like I said, if we want to start holding manufacturing companies accountable for their actions and accountable for their behavior, we need to start having the factory people, the ones working in those factories, being able to just tell what they know. There's a layoff site, I think it's layoff.org, where you get to find out, you know, people are posting anonymously and saying, this is what's happening at this company, this is what's happening at this company. If you want to know the economic health of a nation, look at the layoffs because they're going to tell you the true story. And a lot of times those layoffs are not getting national press unless it's some big company. But the smaller companies, the smaller factories, even the ones that have been around for 200 years, they don't get that national attention. And so whenever companies are getting laid off, when people are getting restructured, whenever things are getting compartmentalized down to 4 people running a factory and outsourcing everything, most of the time these things aren't brought to national attention. And if we start bringing forward everything that's happening in these manufacturing companies, I would love it if China was able to communicate with us and they could tell us exactly what was happening, what the USA companies did. But that site the China labor, let me see, it's called ChinaLaborWatch.org. It has a listing of all the labor violations, and it will surprise you on what you see. A lot of well-known brands is listed on there. Until we start holding these manufacturing companies accountable, and still we start, demanding better from them, as long as we keep pushing that job-killing regulation crap, because that's what keeps factories ethical. That's what keeps them from hurting their workers. That's what keeps them from hurting the environment. Those job-killing regulations are the regulations of a factory that keeps them ethical. If we remove those, now we've got a problem. Now we're setting up factories to become that next cheap, toxic factory. And that's the same fallout that we saw in China is what we're going to see here in the USA, where our streams are going to be polluted, our soil is going to be polluted, it's going to affect your agriculture, it's going to affect your farmland, it's going to affect your recreational, it's going to affect your fishery and your hunting, and I mean, everything. We live in an ecosystem. And so all of these things will affect everything else. Diseases is going to affect people getting sick. More widespread epidemics can happen. Mosquitoes, it carries the viruses, the bird flu, the pig flu, the swine flu. All of these things we saw in China could easily happen here in the USA if factories are not held accountable. And they have to be held accountable, not just here in the USA, not just in China, not just in Vietnam, but all over the world. We have to learn from the mistakes that our ancestors' factories made. And these are even the ancestors that's in our own lifetime that they made, so we don't keep repeating these problems. We need to start investing more in people and, their health and their opportunities. And until we're willing to do that, we're going to continue to see that perpetuation of cheap labor and exploitation of people and slavery and everything else that we've seen before. So that's it. I'm going to end this tonight. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed the conversation.